I think it's important to clarify that specifically when I show up to this conversation and I use language like profit, what I am thinking about is the holistic outcome of leveraging the opportunities that diversity, equity, and inclusion can bring to an organization. And so certainly we know by research that there's a lot of stats out there that has proven that organizations who do have a deep commitment to this work, they are able to attract the best talent, to retain the best talent, and a diverse workforce also has the propensity of helping to create greater problem-solving ability, greater innovation, and all of that drives the bottom line, right? It helps to increase revenues and provides that competitive edge that a lot of organizations are really after, especially in this marketplace where competition is really prevalent.
Hello, Profit First entrepreneurs and thought leaders. We have an exciting conversation today. I have Dr. Nika White that's joining us today, and she is the national authority and also a fearless advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you guys have heard that word DEI. And Dr. White, she's an award-winning management and leadership consultant. She's a keynote speaker. She's also a published author, and she's an executive practitioner for DEI efforts across business, governments, nonprofits, as well as education. And her work has actually led her to be designated by Forbes as one of the top DEI trailblazers. Dr. White, she owns a consulting firm called Nika White Consulting, where her firm works with organizations to identify as well as implement opportunities to embed DEI within their operations and culture. And Dr. White believes that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just a check mark for good business, but a way to transform the world. And today we're going to talk about the Profit Talk of DEI. So we're going to deep dive into that subject and really talk about, holistically DEI, how to implement that within your business, and also talk about how it does good for not just the world, but also good for you. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nika White to the platform. Hey, how are you doing today, Dr. White?
I am doing very well, Suzanne. Thanks so much for having me. I look forward to being in conversation with you today.
Well, this is an exciting conversation, right? It's also an important conversation. I think, the COVID era really brought it to light, just the disparity in economics, right? That's out there with the essential workers versus non-essential workers, and it correlated with death rates and things like that. And today I really want to talk about DEI, implementing that in your organization, really to, not only does it increase profits, like obviously it increases your talent pool, gets you some great team members, but also doing good for the world. So today, first of all, I always love to get the behind story, Dr. White. How did you become a pioneer of this topic? Why did this come to you as being something you wanted to champion?
Thanks for that question, Suzanne. I often jokingly say that this work found me. I didn't find it, but once I became really immersed in the work, I knew that I was drawn to it. I knew that I cared deeply about equity and inclusion, leaving no one behind, and making sure that spaces were safe for people to show up at their best. And so I was doing this work within organizations for quite some time, and then started to notice I was being tapped by others to help support some of their work. And eventually the entrepreneur bug caught me, and I decided to launch out and to do it as an independent contractor. And I really enjoy it. And I enjoy being able to support organizations on their DEI journey as well.
I think it's as small businesses, I always tell people, our audience, they range from doctor's offices to your $50 million staffing firm or construction company. They're very varied. And one of the things with small businesses is, a DEI program, you're not required to have a DEI program. But there are things that you're missing out on if you don't have a program that allows every single team member to feel included in your organization. I think we saw that, especially, last year, this year, coming out of COVID era, where you can't get the team members that you want, right? If you're not recognizing people and treating them properly. And this becomes really important. And so first of all, Dr. White, for those organizations that have not entered into the space of being intentional about being an inclusive environment, let's talk about what you're missing out on, first of all.
I love this question. And I think I want to start by really just commenting on the point that you brought up, whereby there are a lot of small companies and organizations that may feel like this body of work of diversity, equity, inclusion, it's not something that also should be relevant to them. Maybe it's only for those big corporations with deep pockets. But I would really encourage those organizations to think differently, specifically from a standpoint of, as a small business owner myself, I realize that my human capital, people that are working in concert with me to help deliver the work product to our clients, I have to rely on them probably in a deeper way than a larger organization with a lot of different, resources from a staffing perspective. And so it's even more important, I believe, for small organizations to be intentional about how do we create this culture and this environment where we are integrating into the business frameworks, into the culture, a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you for inspiring that thought. Now, getting to your question, this is Profit Talk of DEI. And I think it's important to clarify that specifically when I show up to this conversation and I use language like profit, right? What I am thinking about is the holistic outcome of leveraging the opportunities that diversity, equity, and inclusion can bring to an organization. And so certainly we know by research that there's a lot of stats out there that has proven that organizations who do have a deep commitment to this work, they are able to attract the best talent, to retain the best talent, and a diverse workforce also has the propensity of helping to create greater problem-solving ability, greater innovation, and all of that drives the bottom line, right? It helps to increase revenues and provides that competitive edge that a lot of organizations are really after, especially in this marketplace where competition is really prevalent. But even beyond that, I think about the value proposition of being seen as an employer brand that cares deeply about humanity. Right? There's something to be said for that. There are a number of individuals who, particularly now, post the pandemic, who have really grown accustomed to the value of being a part of an organization that really drives towards impact, that's really committed to well-being, that's committed to fair and equality and equity, and allowing them to show up at their best. And so I think that when you talk about it more from a standpoint of the value proposition, not only does it relate to the revenue bottom line, impact, but it also relates to making people feel a sense of connectivity and trust to those spaces where they find themselves because of that deep commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So all of that certainly drives profit.
Definitely. And I love, the fact that we're calling it an inclusive environment, because I think that we miss that, a lot of times, people will hire people and, we're obviously small businesses, so that we're hiring someone because we need them. We're not filling a spot to
Yes.
put a check mark on a person. We're hiring someone that's qualified, and you hire this great person, but then they leave, right? And they leave because a lot of times they don't feel included.
Right.
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 And let's talk about the importance of inclusiveness. Let's talk about how do we create an inclusive environment where everybody feels included, right? Because, people leave big companies, they leave small companies, right? And it's very expensive to recruit someone.
Yes, it is. It is. And so we have to be more focused on how do we retain the talent that we already have. And so I think the first thing to bring to the conversation is that diversity is already here and happening, right? Diversity is just a point of respect in which things differ. And so when people say, Dr. White, I value diversity, I embrace diversity, I help to create diversity, I think they're well intended. But the reality is that the focus needs to be on inclusion because diversity is already here and happening, right? And so when we think about inclusion, it is vastly different from diversity in the sense that it does require action. We do have to make sure we're being intentional, make sure that we are being strategic, and that we are not being passive about helping to create inclusive environments. We do have to go to work, right? To go to work to help create that level of inclusivity. And when we do so, that's when people can feel a sense of belonging and acceptance. And one of the things, Suzanne, that I share oftentimes about this word belonging, which, by the way, is the outcome of diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that no one, regardless of their background or their demographics, can show up at their best in any environment if they're always questioning whether or not they belong. So if they're questioning, do I belong here? Am I seen? Am I valued? Am I heard? Do I have full opportunity for success? They're not bringing their A game to that environment. And whether you're a small organization or a large organization, we rely on our human capital, our greatest and most, sacred assets to show up at their best so that as a team, as a department, as an organization, as a society, we all can really reach and optimize the output that we want and that I believe we deserve. And so it is critically important for people to think about that. You also mentioned hiring. Sometimes, yes, people are challenged maybe because of the industry. They feel like there aren't enough, underrepresented individuals that are interested or qualified. And what I say is that you always, hands down, hire the best person for the job. Where I find that a lot of organizations, though, are lacking is in the inability to exercise rigor and due diligence around creating a diverse applicant pool. We have to be intentional. We can't just put a posting out there and then expect those communities that are underrepresented in that particular industry to show forth. We have to make sure that we are establishing relationships with, those communities and HBCUs in order to ensure that we are, again, attracting the talent that we want to see in our workplaces. And so I'm a big fan of helping people to realize that the work of talent acquisition from a diverse workforce perspective, it starts well beyond the point of need to fill that position.
Definitely with that. That's very strong points there. And I like, Dr. White, the fact that you said that as employers, we can actually determine the outcome of our team member. If we don't create an environment where they feel like they can show up and be their best, we're setting them up for failure day one, right? So we're responsible for that in many ways from that standpoint. Something that I've always been a big fan of is interning, right? Taking in interns. And from, maybe even start them like right after high school and going into college, right? And, that person, that you're training up, you might have a team member for life with that, So
Exactly.
creating that talent pool also becomes very important too. I hear like a lot of our trades, folks that are in trades out there, they're telling me, oh, nobody wants to go in trades anymore. Nobody wants to climb those roofs. Reality is if you start them young, start them as an intern, you will be able to have that talent pool be there with that. And so it's creating an intentional pipeline.
Absolutely. Intentional is the optimum word here. We can't be passive about it. And I love the fact that you brought up the trade schools, because trade schools have the ability to generate amazing talent. And I think that right now there are many organizations that are probably writing into their job postings a requirement for a 4-year degree. And I would encourage them to reevaluate that, to reassess, is that really necessary? Because that is also a way that organizations find themselves unintentionally leaving out a large percentage of amazing talent, right? And you mentioned internships. I want to encourage organizations to think intently about where you can. How can you ensure that those internships are paid internships or directly aligned with maybe credits that individuals can receive as part of their education? The reason why is because a lot of students who are part of these marginalized communities are not able to work for free. They still need that experience, right? And so I think that those are some small steps that many organizations that may not have in their consideration set to begin to think about, that also can help with the greater inclusivity of the workforce and the pipeline.
Definitely. And I like what you said too, Dr. White, about going to where your candidate is. And so, if you're making a real concerted effort, right, to increase diversity, right? Going to the high schools, this is what we do, and this is what we're hiring in. Especially the at-risk high schools, this is a great career opportunity for you with that. Or the colleges, as Dr. White mentioned before, to create that pool of potential team members to work with you. And, I know like whenever I was not hiring, but looking for a job, and maybe this is a thing of being a woman. They say that women, if they don't meet all the boxes, they don't apply. I wonder what that is for, applicants of color, if they take that same humble approach. If I don't meet all boxes, I'm not going to apply. And so really being careful about what your criteria is that you're asking for, I think is extremely important.
I totally agree. And I would venture to say that, applicants that are part of these, I like to say underestimated populations, whether it's people of color or whether it's like women or whether it's members of the LGBTQ, IA plus community or people with disabilities, oftentimes they will look at a job posting and they feel as though if they don't check all of the boxes, maybe they feel less inclined to even apply. And, to your point, by research, I think Harvard Business Review put out some research a few years ago that talked about men, they don't have that issue oftentimes. They, particularly cis white men, they don't have that issue. They will look at the different bullets that are in the job posting. And if they maybe meet half of them, they're like, yes, this job is in the bag. I have it, right? And so I think there's something to be said for us to socialize around these norms so that we can start to challenge them and interrogate them and have people to be much more mindful about their own decision making as they are encountering their job search, because bias shows up in so many different ways. And oftentimes it's conscious, but, most often it's unconscious. And so how can we not allow ourselves to also be our demise by getting in our own way, believing that we aren't worthy, believing that we aren't qualified, and not even taking the steps to try. So I think that's a tremendous point that you've shared, Suzanne.
I know one of the things is, I had spent some time in the corporate world prior to starting our accounting firm many, many years ago. And one of the things that always disturbed me was there wasn't enough diversity in the management level. We definitely saw it in the mailroom, we saw it in the secretarial levels, but definitely not in the management level. And let's talk about, always the reasons why, because, I always had different thoughts as to why, but I think a big thing was just the inclusion factor, right?
Yes.
People joined and they just weren't mentored up. But I'm curious, Dr. White, you've obviously done a lot of research on this. Why is there not enough diversity and representation at the management level? And how do we create more of that?
This is the million-dollar question that I think practitioners in this space have been addressing for a number of years now. I think it has a lot to do with the bias that still continues to exist within our systems, right? We talk often about unconscious bias in terms of bias in people. Suzanne, I, by the way, like to talk about it in the affirmative. And so I generally use language like conscious inclusion instead of, unconscious bias. How do I get people to think more about the intentionality of consciously showing up with an inclusion mindset? But I think it has everything to do with the bias that continues to exist within our systems, which is why, from an organizational perspective, we have to make sure that we're not only addressing the bias in people, because people are the ones who are, developing systems within organizations. They are helping to shape the culture, but we have to also make sure that we are looking at those systems and that we are holistically trying to approach this in a way that not only addresses the lack of education factor, right, but also how do we create change management within our system so that we can ensure that it is free of the oppression that could be causing some people to not have upward mobility opportunities to get to those mid and senior level roles. I think also organizations need to think a bit more intently about formal mentorship and sponsorship programs. While they both are incredibly valuable and they're interconnected, they aren't the same. Mentorship can be very valuable in that you are walking shoulder to shoulder to help someone to be exposed maybe to the unspoken rules, right, that may help them to be able to get ahead, or to how to gain that visibility in the workplace to where they're able to then be considered for different opportunities. But then you also have sponsors, and their role is very specifically to make sure, certain talent or their names are being mentioned in rooms where they're not in, and that they are being considered for high visible projects and opportunities. So the whole goal there is to get them to those senior level positions. But I think there's so many things that organizations can do to be more intentional around building up the diversity in the workforce at those higher levels. And it starts with, again, the education, addressing the bias in the systems, and then exposure. Sometimes we have to just simply allow people to be in the room, to be exposed to what that looks like. I know of many people that are part of marginalized, communities as professionals that don't even have it on their radar. that they want to be in those upper level positions because they've just never been exposed to what that looks like. What is that path like? Can I be a manager? Can I be a people leader? Right. And so sometimes we have to help people to also realize that that is and should be a part of their career trajectory.
I love it. I love it. So really giving vision, right, to your team member is extremely, or team
Yes.
members, right, is
Yes.
extremely important with that too. And
Yeah.
just even simple things like recognizing good work, just recognize, hey,
Yes.
I really like
Yeah.
that you did that extra work. You stayed after work and finished the project. You met the deadline early.
Yeah.
You did exceptional creativity, just
Yeah.
recognizing when things are done well and making an extra point to do that. I think is extremely important because I think a lot of times as a diversity candidate or diversity person, it's easy to feel overlooked, right?
Oh,
For the
yes.
job that you're doing, but making a point as a manager
Yes.
to really praise that work goes really far with that.
Yeah. And helping people to realize that what has become known as imposter syndrome, it is a misdiagnosis, right? I think sometimes we'll fall into the trap of, the imposter syndrome. And so with intentionality around career pathing, I think that people can become much more intentional about their everyday, just how they show up every day to the workplace. And so I love how you said we have to make sure that we are, giving vision to our employees. They have to be able to see it. They have to be able to see themselves in those roles. And so if you are an organization where your upper level leadership roles are not filled with a diverse slate of people across many different backgrounds and demographics, then that is one of the first things that I would say to look at to try to change, because otherwise, you're going to find that not everyone wants to be a trailblazer, right? That's a lonely place to be. And so, but if I can see others that are part of the organization that have already aspired to that level and are being well treated and well supported, and they are influential and they are empowered, then I'm going to feel more inclined as a person that's part of maybe one of those, underrepresented populations to show up at my best and know that I can do that and be supported too.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really passionate about small business because the reality is we employ the majority of America.
Yes, we do. We
We are the
do.
backbone of America. As much as we love those big companies, reality is we're
Mhm.
the ones that's really supporting America.
So true. So
And
true.
we're the change makers at the end of the day. When we do our part, it creates ripples in the economy, in the communities, and in the world, right? We're changing the face of America's economics by what we do every single day.
Absolutely.
And so this really is a very, very important conversation that we're having today. And so, it was interesting. I'm going to share this story, Dr. White, with you. I remember when I was in college, I interviewed, actually interned at a company in Ottumwa, Iowa. And,
Mhm.
I'm an Ohio State graduate.
Uh-huh.
And I remember when I accepted this as internship, it was in their core milling division at Cargill. And I was so scared to go. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be like driving across America. I'm going to live in a small town that's smaller than my school of Ohio State. And I remember talking to my friend who was driving with me, and I was like, do you think they're going to like burn my car or something? They're like, no, no, no. They want you to get out of there. They're not going to burn your car because then you'll be stuck, and ended up being the most pleasant experience I ever had, as an intern. I
Right.
mean, they were kind. They invited me to lunch, like every single week because it was like procurement department. And, the people were so friendly. And it's about treating people like you would treat people, right? It's about being
Right.
kind at the end of the day.
Yes, it is. I tell everyone that, we cannot underestimate the power of kindness and compassion. And I will tell you, I do believe that the pandemic has warmed us up a bit more to empathy, because, that was an experience that we all were kind of navigating together, right? And so, and I often tell people that if you really want to even deepen your empathy and compassion and kindness for others, then be willing to be vulnerable, to share stories and to receive and hear stories. Because when we share stories, we're listening intently to those fill words. And when we hear those fill words, we're getting proximate to someone's lived experience. And then that helps us to have just a glimpse of walking in their shoes, right? And I think that helps to break down sometimes some of the divisiveness, some of the barriers that can exist. It causes us to be able to reach, across difference and to see another being as a human. And I think there's something just incredible about that. So let's not underestimate compassion and empathy. I think that's so critically important.
Definitely. It's not about politics at the end of the day, or it's about being human and
Yes,
creating, just wanting to be a someone that helps the lives of another is really what it comes up.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that people really are longing to be a part of organizations that has that mindset as part of their values, right? Their core values. That human-centered workplace is something that people are really looking for and they're seeking. And that has so much connectivity to this broad conversation of belonging and inclusion. And so, yeah, organizations definitely will serve themselves well by leaning into that a bit more.
Definitely, definitely. You'll definitely be able to recruit, right? The best and brightest
Yes,
talent, if you make everyone feel included and you reach
absolutely.
communities, right? Because if you've exhausted your own, you have to reach into other
Yeah.
communities too in order to build
Yes.
that workforce.
Yes. Yes.
Dr. White, one of the things I love to ask our guests as we wrap up is if you could leave our viewers and our listeners with one piece of advice, it can be personal, it can be business, what would that be?
Oh, I love this question. There's so much that I could say. I would just encourage people to really take ownership and accountability for their personal learning journey, to deepen their understanding and awareness of equity and inclusion. I think that that is so important right now. That means being willing to unlearn some misinformation, to relearn information perhaps that we've forgotten, and just to always be open to new perspectives. I think that we all are at different places within this journey, and we need to support the continual interest and curiosity that I think many of us are holding these days. That's what's going to make us stronger. The more we know, then the better we are going to position ourselves to do better, right? So that's what I would share. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I would love it if this community could also consider book number 3 that released earlier this year. It's called Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI. That book was done in partnership with my publisher, Forbes Books, and it's available anywhere where you like to get your books. I would love to be in conversation with anyone that sees that as a great resource as they're continuing to deepen their learning around this broad topic.
For you guys who are watching on video, her book is behind her, but Inclusion Uncomplicated by Dr. Nika White. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually drop the link for the book in
Nice.
the show notes so you guys can reach it and order that book. So Dr. White, what's the best way for our audience to get in touch with you, to learn more, to follow you?
Yeah, the easiest way is probably just to go to my website, which is nikawhite.com. That's for my consulting business. And I do a lot of keynote speaking and facilitation of different learning experiences. And so you can also catch me at nikawhitespeaks.com. And on social. So going to those websites will connect you to all the different platforms that I'm a part of.
Thank you, Dr. White. I appreciate it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop Dr. White's contact information in our show notes so you'll be able to look that up and also connect with her there. Thank you, Dr. White, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.